Please be seated. After several amazing deeds, calming a stormy sea, healing a long-suffering woman, bringing a dead girl back to life, Jesus has come home to Nazareth. And there, after teaching in the synagogue to people who have known him the longest, people who have listened and watched and found themselves astonished by his teaching and his healings, now they find themselves greatly offended. It wasn't that long ago. You might remember, not too far back, we had a lesson in which the scribes and Jesus' own family thought that he'd lost his mind, that he'd gone crazy, and they tried to seize him. And it was in that moment that he declared that family was not his blood relatives, but those who gathered with him and believed and loved and served. So arriving back home, maybe Jesus had hoped for reconciliation. Maybe he thought that his family and his community would finally see who he was, welcome him, accept him. But they do not. And their inability to believe, their unbelief, amazes him. Rather than acknowledge him, they feel scandalized. Maybe it's because of what he said and did before, but more so, I think it's because of the way in which God is at work in his life, because it challenges their understanding of who he is or what they hold to be true about him. They know him. They haven't confused him for someone else. Yet their view of Jesus is limited. It's narrow, and it disallows any possibility that this carpenter's son could or should ever be anything other than a loyal son or sibling. What is it that gets in their way? What do you think it is that makes it impossible for them to acknowledge or to accept him? While throughout his ministry, the people and the contexts that Jesus encounters change all the time, Jesus never changes. His message is consistent. It is expansive, and it defies expectation again and again. Some will reject it. Some will be confused by it, especially, it seems, those who are closest to him, his family, and sometimes even his disciples. While myriad others will find in his message hope, possibility, the willingness to listen and hear and be transformed and healed. So in the face of this family rejection and offense, Jesus has to manage his expectations. He notes the truth that the Greek philosopher Plutarch stated so eloquently in the first century, that the most sensible and wisest people are little cared for in their own hometowns. Even the prophets were rejected by their own, but Jesus, like them, does not let the rejection deter him. He stands strong regardless of whether or not others believe in him or accept him, including his family. He is consistent and never, ever compromises any part of himself in an effort to meet the expectations of others. And I wonder, my friends, how much of our true selves do we surrender in our efforts to meet the expectations of other people? I suspect that for some of us, it is more of ourselves than less. And it begs the question, why? Why do we do it? To keep the peace? To avoid conflict or rejection? Do we do it so that we can fit in, find belonging? As Jesus turns to his disciples and commissions them for ministry, he encourages them to stand strong in their being, in their faith, in who they are, and never to compromise themselves in the face of rejection or judgment or criticism, but simply, as Taylor Swift says, to shake it off. It's exactly this that Jesus is doing himself, moving on from his home and the town and the people that he's known his whole life to places and people who are open and willing to hear and to receive and to have their hearts changed. Now, you and I can't really say who will or will not believe in Jesus. Often, as it turns out, those that we expect to embrace the faith and find hope in him do not. Perhaps family members or friends who have left the church. And those that we think won't ever find their way to the faith sometimes come to believe. We just don't know. But maybe what we do know is how it feels to be like Jesus in this moment. Perhaps you yourself have been rejected or discounted or put down or ignored by your family or friends or community, by people that are so certain that they already know who you are, that they fail to be open to who you are becoming, or how God is at work in your life and what that means. In such moments, we can cling tightly to Jesus' words to his disciples as he assures them that they have the authority and the power to be people who bring healing and wholeness into the world. Because truthfully, you and I, we too have the authority to bring healing into the world. We are charged by Jesus with power to be agents of healing, agents of restoration, people who help others to feel whole and to bring hope to our community here and to our community at large. Whether we are met with welcome or met with judgment or resistance, we may trust that God is with us. Because all that Jesus really expects of us is that we be willing to humbly commit ourselves to the well-being of people we encounter every day in our lives. To be people who are committed to doing small things with great love so that the world might be changed. It was Margaret Mead who said, "Never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. In fact, it is the only thing that ever has." I think we here at St. Dunstan's know something about what happens when small groups of committed people gather together with the intention of making the world a better place. Echoing Margaret Mead's sentiments, the Reverend Becca Stevens, who is an Episcopal priest and the founder of Thistle Farms, which is a social justice enterprise that helps women survivors overcome and heal from systems of prostitution and exploitation. She answered when asked to what she attributed her nonprofit's success. And her answer was this. She said, "I believe that doing small things with great love changes the world." Now, she quickly noted that these weren't her original words, that they were seeded in her by Mother Teresa, whose own words and thoughts were seeded in her by Catherine of Siena, who lived hundreds of years ago. So you have this legacy of women who cared about the world. And it was Mother Teresa's version that said, "It is doing the small things with great love that is exactly what love looks like in the world." Now, people questioned Becca about how building a residential house for 5 women could make any difference at all. She said, they thought we were crazy. But what was crazier was to think that this one small thing couldn't make a difference. What was really crazy was to think that if you start a house for 5 women, it might evolve and transform into a global movement for women's freedom. But that is exactly what it did. Because we were crazy enough to think that one small act done with love could change the world. Jesus calls you and I to step out into the world with confidence and courage, bearing love and healing, believing that we can, with one small thing, make a difference. So what is one small thing that Jesus might be calling you or this community to do with great love that could, in fact, change the world? When we put our faith and our trust in Christ as the source of all that we need, it's then that we begin to trust that wherever the gospel is proclaimed, whether it be in word or in action and deed, it will always yield a harvest. We might begin small, but as we tend to others in love, and as we expand our understanding of what family is, it will grow. Now, Jesus tells us, according to Mark, that he encourages those disciples to be strong, to stand strong, and that God is standing with them always. One thing that Jesus doesn't say in this gospel, but I think we have always seen in Jesus' behavior, is the importance of praying. The importance of praying for our neighbors, for the stranger, for the people we have yet to encounter, and how God might lead us to them. The importance of praying for the people whose vision is so narrow and their opinions are so boxed in that they fail to be able to understand how any one of us might want to serve those people at all. To pray for you and each other, that God might instill in you the grace and the courage to step out, to be bold, to do one small act with great love. Jesus calls us not to put a limit on God's love and healing, nor to put a limit upon God's messengers. Every one of us has the tools we need to go into the world and make a difference. We're called to expand and to share our gifts, one small act at a time, always with great love. Imagine the possibilities.